Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season wins total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth. Coming up in this episode, we will be examining the Iowa State Cyclones. Iowa State finished with a 10-2 record and 7-2 in the Big 12. Head coach Matt Campbell in his 9th season with this team, and he has led the Cyclones to a record of 64-51.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Crunch Time Sports Advantage 2024 Team Autopsy Report. We're sticking right here in the Big 12 with the Iowa State Cyclones. You heard the fantastic lead in by Tina. Let's get to it from a betting standpoint from always. This team opened their season win total back in June, opened as low as 7.5. This team absolutely crushed that expectation by winning 10 regular season games last year. So fantastic job there by Coach Campbell. Now, let's dig into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage numbers, because I think what we're going to see about this team, I think we kind of had this team pegged really good in season. So our composite win total is based on 3 specific criterias. And when we look at those criteria, this team had an in-season win total of 9 games. So even with our lofty expectations of this team, they still were able to exceed those win projections by hitting that 10-win mark during the season. So, as we like to do here on the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, is we want to look at who did you play and then how well did they do. So your strength of schedule, that's how are your opponents power ranked by our metrics. And then your strength of record. Now, your strength of record is something that you can't control. It's going to basically come down to how well did your opponents do during the regular season. The better that they did really means that you not only challenged yourself from a strength of schedule standpoint, but your opponents were quality opponents pretty much week in and week out. So let's start right there with Iowa State. And this team's strength of schedule was 49.490, 34th out of 134 Division I teams. That's telling me that they faced a very challenging schedule week in and week out. Now, their strength of record, basically their opponent's win percentage, 54.2%, 62nd out of 134 teams. So their opponent's records weren't as strong as their power rankings. That's going to happen from time to time. So when we look at that, you played a tough schedule. You also play a more than serviceable strength of record opponent there. So good job there out of Iowa State so far. Now, as we like to do with the key takeaway, Iowa State exceeded their expected win total largely due to a well-balanced offensive approach and a strong defensive efficiency numbers. And we'll get into some of those metrics here throughout the podcast here. Let's start with the offense. And if I had to sum up this offense kind of in a bullet point statement, it would be just what we just said as far as the key takeaway goes. This team was balanced and they were both effective. Let's take a look at their points per game. Now, NCAA average, as we always like to give out because we have new listeners all the time and want to thank you for listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, or if you're watching YouTube, continue to hit that subscribe and like button so you can get these notifications when we're going to have these new reports coming out. The NCAA average last year was 28 points per game. Iowa State was a tick better than that at 30.2. When I talked about a strong total offense, NCAA average last year per team was about 387 yards per game. The Cyclones were at 416. Also, good yards per play. Average was about 5.8. This team was at 6.2. Let's give some strengths and weaknesses for this offense, and then we'll dive deep into the numbers here. Okay, this thing had a strong passing game. Did a great job of protecting the young quarterback there, who we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about here in just a moment. Only allowed 15 sacks during the regular season. That's quality work there. And then a strong red zone efficiency number. If I had to look at some weaknesses, occasionally this offense would stall on third downs. Talk about that here in just a moment. Inconsistent running game at times. And then this team kind of struggled against top tier defenses. We'll definitely spend a few minutes breaking that down as well. Let's talk about the quarterback position. I don't always do this on all the podcasts, but I feel like it's important because, one, this young quarterback will be back next year, and his development and continued growth will be key to the Iowa State Cyclone success next year. And that's Rocco Beck, son of really good offensive lineman there, Anthony Beck. So, son Rocco, last year in 14 games, including their trip to the Big 12 championship game and their bowl game, he was 271 completions, 456 attempts, only 59.4% completion percentage. That's got to get significantly better for this team to take a step forward, even more so next year. 3,505 yards, 25 touchdowns to 9 INTs. So really good touchdown to INT ratio. Want to see him take that next step and get those touchdowns up over 30 and maybe drop that interception down by 1 or 2 during the regular season next year. Yards per attempt, 7.7. He's got to get better as far as pushing the ball down the field. Now, let's get into the team numbers here. As I mentioned, offensive points per game, and then how we adjust for you, your opponents. as I mentioned, 30.2 points per game. When we adjust for their opponents, actually we had them at 34.2, so 4 points per game of improvement there. As far as their passing offense, 254.6 yards per game. When we adjusted them out, we came out with 263.7, an increase of 9 yards per game. Now, here's where we saw the biggest jump of improvement, and that was their run game. You heard me mention low rushing numbers. For the regular season, we had them at 161.7 yards rushing per game, but when we adjust for opponents, 195.3. So almost a 34 yard per game improvement. Total offense, 416 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, 459. So an improvement of about 43 yards there. Now, drives ending with either a touchdown or a field goal. The average was about 40% last year. This team was significantly better at 54.2%. Drives ending with a touchdown. NCAA average is about 29%. They were at 37.7. So much improvement there. This team was solid on third downs. NCAA average was 39%. They were at 44.8%. We'll talk about that here in a little bit more. Did only commit 12 turnovers last year. Now, something that we always talk about here. How effective, how explosive, and how efficient was your offense? Those are our 3 E's. And as far as how effective this team's offense was last year, 9th best in the nation. As far as being explosive, 30th. And as far as being an efficient offense, they were 20th. The Iowa State Cyclones ended the regular season for us as the 18th best offense in college football last year. Now, let's talk about their defense. If I had to sum up their defense in a bullet point statement, it would be an elite defensive unit. This team did not allow a lot of points, did not give up a lot of big plays on offense, and I would say an elite pass defense. Wait till I get to their numbers. You're going to see why I make that bold statement. This team was also +8 in the turnover differential. Absolutely love teams that are forcing more turnovers than they're committing. Now, lack of a dominant pass rusher. This team only generated 12 sacks last year. And occasionally in certain games, they did allow some explosive plays there. And at times, they also struggled against the run. Let's get to their defensive numbers here. Points per game allowed. This team allowed 21.5 points per game. They got even better when we adjusted for our opponent, down to 15.5. A point per game improvement by 6 points per game. That's basically, if we adjust for opponent, basically giving up a touchdown less per game. Fantastic there. Okay, passing yards allowed per game, 161 points. Also 161.7. That is absolutely crazy that they gave up 161.7 passing yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, down to 149.4, an improvement by 12 yards per game. The rushing yards allowed 179.2. When we adjust for opponents, down to 143.3, an improvement by 36 yards. Total offense. The raw number says that this team gave up 341 yards per game. When we adjust for opponents, that's down to 292, 48 yard per game improvement. This is why we spend as much time as we do crunching these numbers the way that we do. As far as opponents' drive ending with either a field goal or a touchdown, 22.9%. As far as their opponents ending the end zone, 18.3% of their opponents' drives ended with a touchdown. And this team only allowed 33% third down conversion by their opponent when we adjust that out. Now, let's talk about the coaching decision here. When we look at Coach Campbell, he's one of the more conservative coaches. Out of 144 Division I coaches last year that qualified, he was 95th as far as going for it on fourth down. And I do believe that that was a mistake, especially when you look at how well this team did as far as converting fourth downs last year. This team, had 20 fourth down attempts that they went for it on. They converted 16 of them. So an 80% conversion rate. Coach Campbell, when I'm converting at that high of a rate, I'm probably going to lean to be a little bit more aggressive there. Probably could have paid some dividends in big games like that. When I also look at Coach Campbell as far as one-score games, they were 4-1 last year and 5-2 against quality opponents. This team also is very disciplined. Only 4 penalties per game, less than 30 yards of penalty yardage per game. That's telling me that this team was not making a bunch of mental mistakes there. Fantastic job. Now, let's talk about the special teams. Special teams were solid, but not spectacular. Converted 19 of 25 field goal attempts. That's only 76%. Was reliable as far as punting goes, averaged about 42.5 yards per punt, 68th in the nation. So their special teams were reliable, but not game changers. All right, now let's get into the breakdown of this offense. How good were the defenses that Iowa State faced last year? So 68 Power 4 teams when you look at the 4 major conferences in Notre Dame. So we use that 68 as a benchmark there and really kind of judge how many teams did you face with inside of that top 68. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see this on your screen. If not, if you're listening on your podcast, don't worry about it. I'm going to go through those numbers right now for you. So Iowa was ranked 22nd in defense. Houston was 26th. Baylor 49th. West Virginia 59th. UCF 61st. Kansas was 41st. Cincinnati was 31st. Utah was 12th, and Kansas State was 25th. So 9 of their opponents had defenses ranked inside of that top 68. So very stout there. And when you look at their opponents' average defensive power ranking, about 48 was their average. So they really only faced 2 teams outside of the FCS opponent that were ranked outside of the top 80. So they faced a really difficult schedule week in and week out. Now, let's flip it over to the defense here and see what kind of offenses did the Iowa State Cyclone defense go up against. Once again, we're going to stick with that number 68. So the Iowa Hawkeyes offense was ranked 30th. Baylor was 7th. West Virginia was 36th. UCF was 24th. Texas Tech was 9th. Kansas was 23rd. Cincinnati was 42nd. And Kansas State was 29th. So 8 of their opponents had offenses inside of the top 68. When you average that out, they faced offenses that were on average ranked about 48. Now, let's talk about how did this offense look when they were winning versus how did they look when they lost. So in the 10 games that they won, they were averaging 31 points per game, attempting about 32 passes per game for 240 yards, 7.5 yards per attempt, 12.8 yards per completion. Here's what I like, though. They were running the ball quite a bit. 39 rushing attempts, 176 yards, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. In those 10 wins, they only committed 9 turnovers. Now, in the 2 games that they lost, still averaging 29 points per game, 38 passing attempts. So throwing the ball a little bit more, the yards went up dramatically to 341 yards, 9 yards per attempt, 14.8 yards per completion. Rushing attempts down to 31 per game. Here's the biggest drop off, down to 105.5 yards per game, rushing 3.4 yards per carry. And as far as the turnovers, in those 2 games that they lost, committed 3 turnovers. So what was the difference between when they won and when they lost? About 2 points, let's call it 3 points per game. The biggest standout was they were throwing for more yards, but they weren't running the ball nearly as successful, almost down 71 yards per game rushing. Now, let's talk about their defense. In the 10 games that their defense, when they won, their defense was allowing only 16.7 points per game. Opponents were throwing for about 135 yards, 5.3 yards per attempt, 10.1 yards per completion. Opponents running the ball about, let's call it 33 and a half rushing attempts per game for 172 yards per game, 5.2 yards per rushing attempt. However, when they were winning, they were forcing turnovers. 19 total turnovers forced by this defense. In the 2 games that they lost, boy, they were leaking points like crazy. 34 points per game is what they were surrendering. 266 yards passing per game, 8.3 yards per attempt, 16.1 yards per completion. Opponents were running the ball about the same, 183 yards, 4.6 yards per rushing attempt. But in those 2 losses, they only forced 2 turnovers. So what is the difference in the games when this defense performed, when they lost versus when they won? When they lost, they were giving up 17 more points per game. They were giving up 131 more yards passing per game. And about, let's call it about 11 more rushing yards per game. So they were giving up, as far as total yardage per game, an additional 142 yards per game. Now, what went wrong for Iowa State in 2024? We're going to give it 3 bullet points. They lacked a dominant pass rush, as I talked about it. Only 12 total sacks during the regular season. This team struggled against power rushing teams, and we saw that in the Big 12 title game against Iowa State. Cam Scatterboo got loose and got buck wild against Iowa State. Need more offensive consistency against top defenses. Now, want to point this out. This team is losing not 1 but 2 talented wide receivers. We just saw them at the NFL Combine in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. You're talking about 167 receptions walking out of the door last year. Both receivers went over 1,100 yards receiving. And you're talking about 17 receiving touchdowns. Folks, if you add it up, we're looking at 176 yards per game no longer on this roster. Who's going to step up and answer the call to replace that kind of production? Because their next leading wide receiver was their tight end, Gabe Burkell. 26 receptions for 296 yards, 1 touchdown. If you look at the wide receiver production, it is really skin to win as far as that goes. Folks, let's go ahead and get to this team's final grade, and then we'll give the final verdict. The Iowa State Cyclones will get a grade of an A-. Why? Let's take a look at their strengths. An elite pass defense, balanced offense approach, and strong performances against quality opponents. Whether we're weak, they need a better pass rush. Run defense shows vulnerabilities at times and occasionally struggle on 3rd down. The final verdict. Iowa State was a top 10 caliber team, but occasionally offensive inconsistencies and defensive laps against strong rushing teams kept them from making a playoff push. So what does this team need to do in 2025 to get into the college football playoffs? Key number 1, this team must improve their pass rush. Only 12 sacks in 12 regular season games, not going to get it done. You got to get that number closer to the average of 23. So you're talking about an additional 10 sacks in the regular season there. Key number 2, the team must strengthen the run defense. Cannot live by giving up almost 170 yards rushing per game, whether you win or lose. Gotta play a little bit more stout there. And where the offense can help them with this is if you get a lead early on in the ball game, you make that opponent a little bit more one-dimensional, throwing the ball a little bit more. And we saw how good your pass defense could be. Key number 3, must maintain offensive balance. We saw how when this team lost, they absolutely could not get the ground game going. Must improve in that category. If Iowa State improves in these 3 areas, Iowa State can absolutely make a push for the Big 12 championship game again, and this time find themselves in the college football playoffs.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.